Good morning. My name is Erin Riehle, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. My topic is adding value to the business. Basically, what I will be talking about is a model for including people with disabilities in the workplace, and I'll be discussing our project search model, some of our common principles, benefits to business, and some case studies to illustrate those benefits. I want to start out just by looking at our model. As a businesswoman, we started Project Search about 10 years ago, and what I recognized is that I knew really nothing about disability. And as I was introduced, what would happen is that it turned out there were 15 to 20 agencies and schools in our community, and they were all working with people with disabilities. And what they would do, they would come to our hospital and often to our HR department, and they would ask if we would hire people with disabilities. Now, as a business person, I didn't know who they were or how they were different from one another. And I particularly didn't know that at each agency, they had what I would refer to as a fleet of job developers, and that each job developer had a caseload of consumers. So this was very confusing to business. And often what would happen is the job developers would come into the hospital, and that morning they might have been at a fast food chain, and they might have been at another business before coming to us. And they'd walk into the HR office and they'd ask for a job, often without knowing what jobs we had available or whether their person was even interested. And it was typically done in a cold call. And what we really do when we work with businesses and we work with the people in the rehab industry is to stress that this is not at all a business model. It's not a model that makes sense to us or that is intuitive to us. For example, when we purchase food for our cafeteria, we don't work with every vendor in town who sells food. We develop a relationship with one vendor and work with that person or that company. And when we buy supplies for our operating room, we don't work with every vendor in the country. We work with one vendor. So for business, this is a very confusing system, and what we would prefer is a system that allows us to build relationship with one vendor. This is the other way it looks to business, and this is kind of what happened to us. We did actually hire one person with a disability. That's how we got started in Project Search. And it's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but it felt like the very next week, every other agency in town was sending in their job developers to talk to us to see if we would hire a person from their agency. And what this ended up doing was creating great confusion for us. It also caused us to stop and think, what is this business? How are these people related? How do I know who to work with? It's just a very confusing system to a business. And I want to talk a little bit about the marketing tactics, because I believe that this is one way. If you really look at this when you're approaching business, it's one big way in which you really can add value to what you're doing. From a business point of view, at least initially, when I was approached about hiring people with disabilities, I was kind of blown away because it was unlike any marketing I'd ever experienced before. And I really would call it deficit marketing or marketing by negative descriptors. First of all, it would tend to always be about a cold call. And that's pretty much an anathema to business. When you make a cold call to anybody in the business environment, it's perceived as a rude behavior, as not having done your homework, and it almost sets you up in a negative place, whether you deserve to be there or not. The second thing that I was amazed by is that everyone who came to talk to me would start off the conversation by talking about job carving. And it's kind of funny for me because when I hear carving, I think of Thanksgiving. I had no idea what job carving meant. And when I've spoken at businesses across the country, very few of us know what that means. And I think more importantly, businesses job carve every day. And I'll give you two really good examples. When I hired an administrative assistant, her job description was quite lengthy. And among other things, it asked that she know how to do PowerPoint and Excel and Access. And the truth is, I hired a person who only knew how to do PowerPoint. So in your world, you might have called that job carving. and stressed it as a negative. In my world, I look at that as a potential for job growth, and we look at the skills that a person brings, recognizing that everybody coming into a job is going to need to learn and grow into that system. So businesses don't necessarily look at that as a negative and would never call it job carving. It's just expected business practice. Another example would be a grant writer that I work with. When her position was posted, we wanted somebody who had lengthy work in disability services, and we wanted somebody who'd written grants to the Department of Labor and the Department of Education. Well, we actually ended up hiring a microbiologist who just happened to be a good writer. But again, we didn't stress the negative by calling it job carving. So hopefully that makes sense to you in terms of just kind of how you can add value by watching your language. The other thing that we started noticing as a business is that when job developers and job coaches would come to us, they would almost always ask for the easiest jobs. What are your easiest jobs? Do you have any jobs in the cafeteria? Do you have any jobs in your cleaning service? Which almost, if you're a business person and you're sitting there listening to that, then you're wondering what's wrong with the person they're trying to market, that up front they're asking for the easiest jobs. And what's that about? The other thing is I'm often asked or told that I would be eligible for tax credits, that it would be possible for me to offer a sub-minimum wage, that in some cases, if I hire a person with a disability, they might be eligible for subsidized salary support for 3 months, and they would get job coaching. So for me, in terms of marketing, and I'll repeat what I said earlier, these really, to business, are deficit marketing tactics. It's marketing a product or a person by telling the business up front all the negatives about this person. And it seems like rather an odd strategy when there's so many people with disabilities who need employment, and it also isn't necessary from a business point of view. You know, I also talk about job coaching a lot. Job coaching to business is what we refer to as orientation. And every new nurse who's hired at Children's Hospital right now in Cincinnati goes through 6 months of an orientation, and she has a preceptor with her the entire time who's paid to do that job. And yet we don't use a special lingo or a special language to denote deficiency. We just refer to it as orientation with support. One other thing that I noticed real quickly, we actually hired 13 people with disabilities. And I was very naive, and I believed that I was hiring 13 people with disabilities. What I didn't know, and I didn't understand this about the system, was that not only had I hired 13 people with disabilities, but because of the way the system operates, I was also going to get 13 job developers, 13 job coaches, and 13 follow-along staff. The truth is, business can tolerate, quite often, 13 people with disabilities. What we struggle with is 39 support staff from 13 different agencies who believe that they can take up our parking spaces, come in and out of our business without giving any notice, not follow our procedures for orientation or testing, not have a name badge, and kind of wander through our system without any direct relationship to us. And so when we started this, and when we originally hired those 13 people, the hospital very quickly said, again, we don't have an issue with your 13 employees with disabilities. We do have an issue with the 39 people who are constantly coming in and out and supporting them. So we had to look at a system that added value to business, and this does not. This may add value to the agency, but as far as business is concerned, this is actually quite a negative. It does not allow us to establish a relationship. It's very, very hard to work with 39 different people. So what we developed as a result of looking at all these issues and really trying to come up with a system that would truly add value to business was what we call a single point of entry. And it really is a standard business practice. It means that when we work with people with disabilities, we use a preferred vendor system. So as a business, we went out into the community and we invited an agency and a school to partner with us. We wanted to know their staff. We wanted to have a relationship with them that was mutual. We wanted to be a part of the process, including making some decisions. We wanted to have people who were on site but had name badges, knew our practices, had gone through our orientation. And so we set up a preferred vendor system, which allowed us to establish relationship. And that really has been one of the critical pieces of Project Search and why we've been successful across the country. Some of the key differences between our program and what I would consider traditional rehab practices is that we don't allow people to volunteer, and I always take some flack for this. The truth is, I know that volunteering is very good, and there are awesome opportunities when used appropriately. But again, what I find, especially in healthcare, is that often the people who are working in support of people with disabilities, when they come to a business, the first door they knock on is the head of the volunteer office. And no one else does that. If we're working with nursing students or medical students or child life students, none of those folks come through the volunteer office. They don't think to go there first. And for some reason in the disability community, there tends to be this thought that that's where you need to go first. And I don't think it's business that's asking that. I think it's just become a long-standing practice. What happens, though, is that we get an immediate message that the group with whom you're working, the person with whom you're working, needs to volunteer and probably is not capable of paid employment. So again, it's a subtle message that ends up being a deficit marketing tactic. And what we say to folks with disabilities who want to volunteer, volunteering is a great thing, but we approach it as part of normal life. And if you have a job, or you're independently wealthy, or you're retired, and you want to volunteer to give back to the community, that's great. But if you're looking at volunteering as your only entrance into the work world, then you're sending instead a message to that business that you are less capable of others who might come in through a traditional avenue. The other thing we work on is really having a collaborative relationship. So when we work with our school and our agencies, we know them. We give them name badges. We have the same group of people on site all the time. And so we have offered them a desk space. And they are present every day to help us work with our employees with disabilities. We do not have an enclave. The employees with disabilities do not report to me or to any one department. They're scattered throughout the hospital just as any other employee would be. But our on-site agency staff are there to support them on a daily basis if they have an issue or a need. So as I said, we have on-site staff. Because we have on-site staff and they're there every day, they develop an expertise in our field. They begin to speak our language. They learn the managers' names. They become incredibly skilled and gifted in developing accommodations and adaptations. So it's an awesome way of working together. As I mentioned, they develop relationships with the departments, which is critical. What that allows then, what I would say is that oftentimes jobs in big businesses aren't just the posted positions. Things happen as a matter of daily course. And if you are an outside agency and you have no relationship, you're never privy to those jobs or positions that may just happen. But if you're inside the hospital and you are in relationship and you understand the business, then over time people start to come to you and say, you know what, we're going to create a job and I think your folks might be able to do it. Are you interested? And so we found that in the past 10 years, probably half of our jobs have come about because we've developed relationships with the department heads between the agencies that they would never have had the opportunity to develop in a traditional system. The other key thing is that we are able to have an immediate response to any changes or problems. And I'll give you a really good example. We stock the supplies in the emergency room. And there's probably, 400 to 500 different types of supplies in every single room. And there's 58 rooms. Well, the truth is that supplies change a lot. So today, I might use a Wyatt abacath, which is a needle, And tomorrow I might use a Norton Abacath. And that email might come to me from the materials management department, and they might say, I need you to swap them out tomorrow, and instead of stocking 5, we're going to stock 6. Well, if I work with people with disabilities, as is most traditionally done in the community, and someone just came in periodically to check on how they were doing, there would be absolutely no way we could find out about that change in supplies, or that the person with a disability could be there to make the change. And over time, if that happened on a weekly basis, that person would lose their job. But because we have an on-site person and we are in relationship, the on-site agency staff is there every day to hear about these changes, step in, make a plan to address them, do ongoing job training or orientation, and we're able to keep people in very complex jobs for 7, 8, 9 years. Because they're on site in one business, they become experts in accommodations and adaptations, and you'll see that later with some of my slides. They also step in with our department heads and assist with feedback, evaluations, and mandatory education. That's been critical for us. And maybe most importantly, they are there when our staff with disabilities have benefit questions, and it happens all the time. And as a business, and it may sound terrible, but businesses have objectives. And they are interested in diversity, but they're not really interested in becoming experts in all of the benefit questions that may be out there. And so when you step in as an agency and you offer to be present in relationship and take the burden for answering those benefit questions off of the business, then you've done a great service for them. And they come to see you as a tremendous partner who's going to be of value in many, many areas. What this has allowed us to do is really look for non-traditional jobs. So in our system and in our program across the country, we did not look for the easiest jobs, but we look for jobs that are complex and systematic because we have the system to support them. It's interesting. Every time I hear that approximately 60% of people with significant disabilities are working in food service and cleaning, I'm constantly amazed by that because it's true, it's very honorable work. But there's no way that 60% of any population desires to work in one field. It's totally beyond the realm of belief. And so it has to be something that we as support staff are doing that keeps them in those types of jobs. So we really look at it differently, and we instead look for jobs that are complex but systematic that we can support by having agency staff on site. Now what I want to do is run through some of our positions, talk a little bit about them, and just give you some idea from a business point of view of how incredibly important our relationship with agencies and rehab folks has been. It has been such a huge benefit to our hospital. We also have programs in banks and universities and park districts, and over again we see the same kind of things happening. And hopefully you'll come away today with some sense of how you add value, both as an agency and as people with disabilities, to big business. But this is a woman by the name of Gretchen Ketters, and I do have permission to use their names and their disability to disclose that with you today. Gretchen has worked for us for about 8 years, and she actually stocks supplies on 2 entire units in our hospital. Now what's amazing to me is when I first started this, as a business person, I really didn't know about disability, and I probably had very arrogant business ideas about what a person with a disability could and couldn't do because of what I'd seen in the community. And so I thought they had to be able to count as high as I could, and they had to know the name of every single piece of equipment in order to work in the business. And I had this really lofty notion that our work was so important that maybe people with disabilities couldn't do it. And my epiphany happened one day when I was looking at the jobs we were doing and the support staff, and I looked at my budget, and what I found is that as a hospital, more than half of our revenue comes from providing medical care to people with chronic illnesses and disabilities. And in fact, people with disabilities right now in the United States have more disposable income than all adolescents aged birth to 21. So in terms of financial power, it's immense. And businesses are just beginning to wake up to this fact. So it's part of the reason why businesses are interested, and you can use that to your advantage. But when we hired Gretchen, the truth about Gretchen is that she's not a very strong counter. And I had no idea how a young woman who couldn't count beyond 10 could ever stock supplies. But again, and I apologize for kind of laboring the point, but we were in relationship with the agency, and they were able, because we knew them and trusted them, to teach us so much as a business that we would never have known. And what these are golf beads. And if you're a bad golfer, then you'll know that it's a string of 10 beads that you hang on your belt loop, and it's kind of like a mini abacus, and you can move those beads up and down on the string. Gretchen stocks 2 entire units at our hospital, meaning she goes in and out of rooms on 2 departments, and every piece of equipment that goes in there she's placing. And the way she does it is by counting on these golf beads. And I wouldn't even have thought to ever have used them, nor would our hospital. And now we have a number of people who use different systems, and they can still do the job. They just have to have a small accommodation. We also have folks who use counting boards. It's become commonplace for us. And we have learned as a business that it's not important that you be able to count as high as we can. It's important that our jobs can be broken down into 5s and 10s. And we've also learned that no matter how important we think we are, most of our jobs can be broken down into 5s and 10s. So it's been a real lesson for us at being inclusive. This is Elizabeth, and you can see her using a counting board. Elizabeth also has Down syndrome and stocks another 2 of our units. Again, meaning she goes into rooms, works with patient carts, and is putting equipment in and out of those carts. You know, as a hospital, talking about the benefits that you bring, employment is a major concern for our patients. And literally, if you think about it, and over half of our revenue comes from treating patients with chronic illnesses and disabilities, and it does in every hospital, then employment is a major concern for the folks who are coming in and out of every hospital in America. In fact, we did a survey, and we looked at our kids with chronic illnesses and disabilities, and we asked them what was most important in their life. And I think we probably thought they were going to say healthcare, because they have a chronic illness or a disability, and we must have thought we were the most important. In fact, the number 1 answer was employment. They care more about employment than they do about their health status. And so what we learned from that, and what healthcare and other businesses learn from that, is that if we provide for them jobs, if we provide for them role models, then they are far more likely to be compliant with their own health care. And that factors in whether you're a child or an adult. This is Heidi Hams. It's really interesting. Heidi had been a patient at our hospital her entire life. She's now about 27, 28 years old. Heidi has a significant disability, but she sterilizes and processes every isolate used in our hospital. And we have a 55-bed neonatal intensive care unit, which means that every one of our critical babies is going into an isolate that's been sterilized and prepared by a young woman with a significant disability. But what we found is that Heidi values this job. She knew what it was like to be a patient. She loves working at the hospital. She is a great role model for everybody who walks through our hallway. And she knows that this job is important. She looks for, each isolate has over 44 removable parts. She has to change the filter, the wiring, check the electrical, the water levels. Everything about this isolate is in Heidi's hands. And we have learned that she's the most trustworthy employee we could ever have doing this job. Now, what's fascinating to me about this is Heidi's actually worked for us for 9 years. And this is how she learned her job, through pictures on the wall. And again, I never would have thought of it. The hospital would never have known how to do this. This was really of an added value to our business. But they put it up, and it's still up there. It's not up there, though, because Heidi needs it. It's up there because she actually works for a company called Sodexo Marriott, which is one of our contract agencies. And Sodexo Marriott, anytime they hire a new manager, they train them regionally. And so Heidi Hams a young woman with a significant disability trains every new manager hired by Sodexo Marriott working east of the Mississippi. So in the past 2 years, she has trained 198 people. She has 2 more to get to 200. You talk about added value to a business. This is unbelievable for us. And not just for us, but it's become added value for all of Sodexo Marriott east of the Mississippi. Another thing about Heidi, in addition to her fairly severe cognitive and physical disabilities, she also has epilepsy. And when she was starting to train these managers, she would occasionally have seizures. And the department came to us and said, you know, we're not sure what to do with that. The managers are very nervous about Heidi and her seizure disorder. And so what we did, we sat down with Heidi and her mom and said, you know, let's come up with 2 or 3 sentences that honorably describe Heidi's seizure disorder. Let's give her business cards. And so every time she is ordering a manager, she simply turns to them, hands them her business card, asks them to read the back of the card, and it's a done deal. It's no longer an issue. And so now we use business cards like this to add value to many of our employees with disabilities. It normalizes the whole procedure. It treats them like we would any other employee, and it takes away some of the negative stigma. You know, we have found that physicians from every specialty in a hospital look to Project Search now to provide hope and role models for their patients with chronic illnesses and disabilities. It's funny because I was stopped by a physician in the hallway the other day, and she literally said to me, you know, I am the head of the genetics department, and she said, I meet with families every day, and I'm giving them what might be perceived as bad or unfortunate news. And she said, what I tell them at the end of our conversation is that they should go downstairs in our main hallway, and they should spend a half an hour to an hour walking through our hospital and looking at all the people with disabilities who work here and are doing incredibly important work. And it gives them hope, but not only does it give them hope, it gives me hope as a physician. And so then she started talking about Tim Erdman. Tim works at our hospital. He has severe cerebral palsy. He's probably, I think, 35 years old now. But Tim's been working for us for 10 years. And he does all of our lab billing. The truth is, he uses a key guard. And his keystrokes may not be as high as mine, but his quality is better. He makes fewer mistakes. And as a business, we care less about speed than we do about accuracy. And Tim is very accurate. So part of what your added benefit is to teach us, to coach us in how work can get done. That accuracy is more important than speed, and that there's always some leeway for working with people with disabilities. We have folks who use one-handed keyboards, folks who use what I call an air mouse, you know, a mouse that you use on a vertical plane. I think over and over we find that there are things that never existed that through our relationship have become invaluable tools, not just for our employees with disabilities, but for all of our employees. Hiring people with disabilities can improve performance and increase retention in positions with chronically high turnover. In our clinical sterilization department, we found that the average number of days on the job of years was 2.4. When we began hiring some people with disabilities, their average tenure is 6 years. So we've more than doubled that. This is a young woman by the name of Jill Frambies. Jill has Down syndrome, and she works in our sterilization department, which means she is putting together and sterilizing trays that go into our operating room. You talk about a critical job. I mean, we're not talking about jobs that if you make a mistake, it's not a big deal. You know, we have not looked at it and said, oh, we have people with disabilities, let's give them the easiest job. We have found that with the proper support, people with disabilities have become some of our most reliable employees in some of our most complex areas. So it kind of turns the whole thing on its head. But Jill sterilizes all these instruments and tools. She is now preparing trays for tracheotomies and laparotomies, and that's abdominal surgery. And these, I don't know how to stress it enough, but these instruments have to be laid at an exact angle. They have to be perfectly aligned and perfectly sterilized. And we have people with disabilities doing this job. For us, it has been a tremendous added value. Not only that, though, When we first hired Jill, this was the manual they gave us to teach her how to do the job. It's what they use with most of their employees. And so the agency said, you know, that's nice, but it's not really going to work for Jill. Do you care if I modify it? And so this is what we got back. We got back a book that had pictures and measurements and was very, very clear. And about 2 weeks after we put this book in place, the department head came to us and said, you know, your books are so much better than what we're currently using. Could you create a book for us for every single tray? And so now that department, every single person who's hired, uses a book modeled after a book that was put together for a person with a disability. Talk about added value. And you can only work with businesses through relationship and get to know them well enough to create these kind of tools. Children with their disabilities and their families make up a significant market segment, and I know I'm preaching to the choir. This is our program at the bank, and we actually have a school program there, and we have 12 students. And this is the first day that we opened our classroom. You know, I would bet you every student and every family in this class now banks with Fifth Third. And all of their extended family members bank with Fifth Third because their perception of Fifth Third has changed. And so by working with people with disabilities, not only are they getting good employees, but they're sending a message to society that Fifth Third is a good and caring and gentle place to work. And there's a perception by society that if you work with people with disabilities, you must be a good place to work for all of your employees. So the added benefit there is tremendous. Families with a vested interest in disability issues are often highly motivated donors with considerable giving potential. So as a business for us, and especially as a hospital, this has been something we never really expected. But I talk about Kirk Hunnefeld. We hired Kirk 10 years ago. We didn't know that his family had a family foundation, but in fact they did. And they had never really given to disability causes before. But before we knew it, because we were working with Kirk, they were sending foundation money to the hospital. And that's happened over and over again. There are many families who have connections and ties. And if you reach out and you work with those families, quite often it becomes financially of benefit to your business. A great example at Fifth Third, not only do they have people now who are switching their accounts to the bank, but they also are getting folks who have foundations, like Kirk's family, who says, well, if you're going to work with people with disabilities and with Project Search, we're going to move our foundation to your bank. So always opportunities for added benefit. The American public thinks highly of companies that hire people with disabilities. You know, Neil Romano, and I think he's done a webcast before, just completed a tremendous study that said that 88% of Americans say that they would prefer to do business with a company that hires people with disabilities over a similar competitor that does not. We have certainly found that to be the case. People believe we are better because we hire people with disabilities, that we must have better physicians and better nurses, that we must be more caring for our families and our patients. So the benefits have just been kind of myriad, things we never expected. You know, there will be labor shortage as the population ages. There already is. And people with disabilities can be trained to do very complex work that other staff may undervalue, and they can do it with pride and accountability. This is a classic example. At our hospital, we use these oximetry probes, and they can be recycled. They cost the hospital $18 new, but they can be recycled one time for $6. Now, the truth is, we were throwing them all out because we didn't have anybody who would pick them up, process them, and send them in. We couldn't find anybody to do the job. And so the agency that we work with said, how about a person with a disability? And so we hired Nick. Now, the truth is, Nick doesn't count well. He really only has strength in one arm. And in order to process these when we first started, you had to put them in a package of 40, you had to wipe them down with a sterilizing agent, and you had to be able to look at the head and make sure that the wires weren't broken. And even I, after some experience with this program, was kind of surprised when we hired Nick because he couldn't count to 40 and he couldn't wipe it down independently and check it. But what our partners built for us was a standing lazy Susan. And it's a jig, And they cut 40 holes, 40 slots into the top. And they made it so that Nick can get his wheelchair under it. And so now all he has to do is fill every slot, and they're automatically 40. It eliminates counting. And because they're hanging, he can wipe it down with one hand and a sterilizing agent. And last year, by performing this one job, our hospital made $225,000. We'd been throwing these out for years, and I know hospitals all over the country that are still throwing them out because they cannot find somebody to value this work. Universal design, this has been huge for us. And if I were a rehab person, I'd be all over this in terms of marketing. I think it's such a missed opportunity. But what we have found is by working with people with disabilities, we've put things in place which have become universal design for all of our employees. I'll give you a couple examples. In our storeroom, we had a person with low vision, and we needed to enlarge the print. And I think you can see it on the bin at the left. What ended up happening is that the staff in the department went through and took all of our little labels and put them up over the small labels, because everybody recognizes that the larger label is easier to read. So it was done for a person with a disability. It served everybody. The same thing in our storeroom where we keep our food. We have a person who is not a reader, and she stocks all of our kitchens on all of our units. And so what they did for her when we hired her, they took pictures of every single thing in the department. It's fascinating to me because she doesn't use these anymore. She knows where we keep our mayonnaise and our Miracle Whip and our chocolate chip cookies. But the department will call us when one of these signs is missing or when they get a new item. Because what they've found is that processing words is faster for everybody than processing pictures is faster for everybody than processing words. It makes sense, and the entire department likes it. So now we have pictures, and no one probably even remembers that they were put there for a person with a disability. This is EJ. EJ stocks our emergency department. We have a 58-bed emergency department. It's one of the largest pediatric emergency departments in the country. EJ has autism. And when he started, we kept 5 sizes of gloves, sterile gloves, and we kept 3 pair of each size. And we'd throw them into the bottom drawer with a rubber band around each set of 3. Well, EJ had trouble figuring out which packet needed a glove and how to get the gloves in and out of the rubber band. And so the person working with him came in and said, "Do you care if I redesign your drawer?" Well, heck, we didn't care. It was great for us. It was a true gift. We just had never thought of it. And so they came in and they redesigned our drawers. We noticed immediately that we were saving tens of thousands of dollars. And the reason why is that sterile gloves, when we went in and grabbed them, if we pull out the wrong size and opened it, then we had to throw it away and put on a different size. If we grabbed it and pulled it out of the rubber band, sometimes the rubber band ripped the side and they were no longer sterile. So we were losing gloves just because of how we were storing them. But it never dawned on us to look at considering a different way until we hired a person with a disability. Hiring employees with disabilities brings new sources of ideas, creativity, and problem solving into the workplace. I do apologize for my voice. I had flu last week and I'm still quite hoarse. This is a young woman by the name of Esther, and Esther works at Fifth Third Bank in our program there. And she actually works in what's called the vault, where they keep all of the signature cards for all of their big corporate customers. It's an incredibly important area. And there are a number of people who work there. And about 2 days after Esther started working there, a couple of the people came out and said, we think Esther doesn't know how to file. And so we went and investigated. Well, the truth is, in those 2 days, she had just been being oriented, and she hadn't even filed anything yet. But because a person with a disability was placed there, people were looking at things differently. So we went in and we did, and that's not good. I'd be the first to say that's a problem, but it does happen. What it did is it gave us an opportunity to go in and assess what was going on in that department. And what we found is that people were using 3 different ways of filing. So for years, they'd been filing according to 3 different ways, and they didn't even know it. And for years, they hadn't been able to find their files. They were hunting and searching. And so because we put a person with a disability in there, we gave everybody a test and said, how do you file? And not just Esther, everybody working in the department. How do you file? Here's what standard way do you want to use? And then we were able to go back through and retrain everybody in that department on one filing system. They would never have thought to have done it. It's definitely added value. I want to finish up with just this slide and a little bit of a story. I think that sometimes rehab agencies, you really do need to be reminded of the critical value that you play in business, or that you're capable of playing, and how you can educate employers like myself and bring us along so that we understand over time. But just last year, Prince Edward from England came and toured our program. And you know, sometimes you get to a cocky place and you think that because you work with people with disabilities that you understand them. And we tend sometimes to underestimate them. And you fall into this trap of underestimating. And so we were touring Prince Edward around the hospital, looking at some of our jobs. And we were talking about Jill. And we were going on and on, for some reason, about the fact that Jill didn't care how much she made. And Jill would work even if she didn't get a paycheck. Money wasn't important. She just loved being at the hospital. She was a great employee. And she worked, and we must have said this probably a dozen different ways. And I look back on it and I'm actually embarrassed because I'm not sure what our point was. But it really was underestimating her potential. But I learned a lesson that day that really has stuck with me about the value of people with disabilities and how I should never underestimate. Because at the end of the visit, Prince Edward stood up and he bowed to Jill and he shook her hand and he said, you know, Jill, I bet this has been a very big day in your life. And Jill looked at Prince Edward and said, it's a great day, it's payday. It's not what we expected. It's not what the prince expected. But it was a lesson to us that people with disabilities have the same feelings, the same thoughts, the same needs. They're not, just because they have a disability, doesn't mean, it's not the equivalent of being a non-thinking person. And Jill really showed us that day that we should never, ever underestimate the ability of people with disabilities. So I want to leave you with just one quote. It's my favorite quote by Margaret Mead. And she said, if we are to achieve a richer culture, rich in contrasting values, we must recognize the whole gamut of human potentialities, and so weave a less arbitrary social fabric, one in which each diverse gift will find a fitting place. What we try to do with Project Search, and what I know all of you try to do, is really find a fabric in which each diverse gift has a fitting place. And I thank you for that.